Hello guys and girls, Airsick Hydra here. Today's video we're going to be talking yet again about Inquisitor Martyr. The topic of today's video though is going to be on the customization and choices available to your character in terms of personalizing your Inquisitor. Now I'm going to be tackling this from a different direction to some of the previous videos. You may have noticed I've already tackled this topic I think about 2 or 3 times. Today though I'm going to be comparing the games specifically to Path of Exile, as I do think the 2 games have some concepts in common, and I'm just going to use this to highlight what Inquisitor Martyr has done well and what I think it's done badly. So without any further ado, I hope you like the video, I hope you subscribe, and feel free to join me on my journey of following Inquisitor Martyr through its development. Right, so let's get cracking with what these games have in common. And although not at first glance, I do believe that the skill trees themselves are fairly similar. Now what you'll notice what I mean by the skill tree within Path of Exile is this giant massive roadmap with various interlacing segments, and the similarity really comes from about 80% of the points being very minor bonuses or buffs to your character, small percentage gains and things like that, and every now and again one of these points will give you a more significant buff or bonus to your character. Now Inquisitor Martyr has done this in a very similar way in terms of numbers, however they've chunked this into lots and lots of small trees which you can pick separately. So thus far the only differences I can really see between these 2 systems: Inquisitor Martyr lets you start in more places, so therefore allows you a little bit more personalization, but obviously the depth and complexity is there within Path of Exile. Now there is a hidden sort of gem within Path of Exile's feature that around the edges you'll also see the occasional what I'll refer to as a build modifier. These certain places where you put something in and boom, it changes your build and how your character works. Now Inquisitor Martyr has taken these out and they've put them into a separate system known as the perk system. Now, I'm not going to say the 2 are comparable because Path of Exiles is a lot more complex, but Inquisitor Martyr does have something similar which will affect your build, playstyles, etc. via these perks, which will give your character a buff, but often at the price of also giving them a penalty, and basically just changing how you play or how you build your character a little bit. So thus far for me, there are some similarities, at least in terms of what you get for your character per skill point, and each of these games I think aims for something around the 200 skill point mark, so there are a lot of points to be spending. Moving on from here though, this is where the accessibility which Martyr has gone for and the complexity of the Path of Exile system really sort of separates off, and this is with the skill selection system. So going with Path of Exile here, you can see that we can select different gems for our gear, and we equip things to our character. We equip skills to our character, and obviously there's a fair few to choose from. I think there's a total of 8 or 9. And in Inquisitor Martyr you have a similar number, but only a few are actually attached to your weapon, the rest are a belt and an armour. But within Path of Exile we do have about 250 of these gems to pick from, so that is a lot of potential skills. Now obviously they're not all going to be viable to be used together, but in terms of complexity and depth, a lot more planning and a lot more thought needs to be involved. Whereas Inquisitor Martyr, they've gone for a template system where you pick a weapon and the weapon will literally come predetermined with its skill. So very, very different directions here between the 2. One offers you unlimited, more or less, personalization within Path of Exile, and Inquisitor Martyr slaps you in the face and says, there you go, there's your weapon, there's your skills. Now, I'm not saying that that's a terrible thing, because there are advantages to it and there are clear reasons why they've done it. It's something I'll revisit in a moment, but they haven't just done this out of laziness, they've basically done this because hashtag 40k IP. Some other layer of depth that I'd like to touch on though is that the gem system within Path of Exile also lets you choose the bonuses for each ability. You get to choose if it stuns, if it shocks, if it slows, if it does whatever. You have loads of gems that you can attach onto the skills, and then obviously customize yourself even further for another layer of depth. Inquisitor Martyr has sort of furthered their journey down the template system and said, okay, you've got a weapon, here are your bonuses. And they come pre-attached and your weapon is what your weapon is. Now, again, I think the same reasons applies to why they've done this, not so much out of laziness, just because the 40k IP tells you that a lasgun and a plasma gun may both be heat-based as a weapon, but they should not behave the same. They should be completely different. The concept of having an Inquisitor with a plasma gun and an Inquisitor with a lasgun, both doing the same thing, does not fit the 40k IP. The weapon, in terms of the tabletop, in terms of our lifetime of playing 40k, the weapon is the more important feature of a character, but we'll come back to that in a moment. The major difference, how I would highlight here, I don't think the major difference in terms of what I'm dissatisfied with is the complexity, because I would even argue that by the time you get to late game, the amount of viable choices for a typical ARPG, although there may be 10,000 various skill combinations, the amount of viable end game choices is normally something like 5 to 10 builds, of which 2 or 3 are end game viable, and by end game viable I mean at the sort of the quote unquote meta difficulty. I don't think there's as much choice as there appears to be, but what happens in a traditional ARPG is straight away you're faced with a choice. So when I jump down in Path of Exile and make a new character, I get to, within the first 60 seconds of the game, pick a skill gem, and I know that I can choose option A or option B. And whatever I choose, I have the knowledge in my head that other people will have chosen the other thing, so I'm going on my own journey. And then further down the line, I get to make another choice. But what happens is that choice is on top of the previous choice I made, and then I make another and another and another. And what you end up with is a tree with hundreds of different branches, thousands of different branches, and you follow your own path. It may be good, it may be crap, that doesn't really matter, but the fact is you follow your own path. Each choice stacks on top of the previous one, and you get to feel like this is your journey. Well, this is where Inquisitor Martyr just doesn't do that. It does give you choice in a sense, because it'll give you a weapon and say, here's a weapon, you can choose to use it or not. And when you find a better weapon, it can sort of say, well, this is a higher power rating, so there you go, you could choose to use this or stick with what you've got. But your choices don't stack on top of each other. You get to revisit your original choice and exchange your original choice for another. It's sort of a door number 1, 2 or 3 scenario. You never get to go through door number 1 and then get faced with another 3 doors. So this is, I think, one of the major gripes players will have with the game in terms of its complexity, because at the moment you don't get faced with many choices that make your journey as an ARPG player feel sort of remotely personalised. Unfortunately, the only way you can customise a build or make it really feel at all like it might be something that you're doing is by the time you've got about 50 skill points and all of the perks unlocked, which is quote unquote end game. But again, I would emphasise that I do think Inquisitor Martyr in the late game is going to shine a little bit more perhaps than the traditional system, and I'm not white knighting here, I'm just trying to state some facts. That by having all of these templates, you do get complete control over their viability. If one is underpowered, you buff it. You can't necessarily buff certain builds in an ARPG of traditional senses, because if you buff one build, it's going to affect all the other builds. So sometimes there will just be bad builds and good builds. Now, some of you will argue, and I would also agree with you, that that's actually a good thing for a game, to have bad builds and good builds, because then you get to say, oh hey, this is a good build, this is what I want to use, and it creates a sense of excitement when you find one. And obviously, though, it does create problems that if you've only got 3 really good builds, anyone not using those is quote unquote not in the meta, not with the times, and going to have a shit time in terms of co-op. But there you go. This for me is the biggest issue that Inquisitor Martyr is faced with at the moment, and I'm not defending them for this. This is just the choice they have made, but I do wonder, because I've made several videos talking about this, and I'm not a game designer, but I do wonder if there was an alternative, because I've played with all of the options. I've tried giving feedback on all of these to try and come up with something better, and you can come up with something better quite easily, but you can't come up with something that fits 40k and is better very easily at all. Just to take a couple minutes before we wrap up the video, you have to have weapon-orientated abilities. That's set in stone. You can't have character-orientated abilities, because you cannot have a lasgun and a plasma gun behaving the same in the game. That is just... the 40k IP doesn't allow that. You cannot have a heavy bolter and a bolter pistol doing the exact same thing because your character has the same skills. So okay, let's just say we take weapon categories and then we put skills in those. Well, you can't classify them by heat weapons because one heat weapon might be anti-vehicle and one heat weapon might be anti-infantry. They shouldn't cross over. They're different. Same with heavy weapons. You can't give a plasma cannon and a heavy bolter the same abilities. So how are you going to do it? Oh, okay, maybe we could go for a skill tree for every single weapon. That's 50 skill trees. Okay, that's an idea. That's possible that you could maybe... Well, then you've actually got to explain to players why they unlock stuff on a weapon the more they play it. And then you've got to deal with the fact that players will start with a weapon that's weaker for no apparent reason, which again I think is quite hard to fit into the IP as well. It's quite hard to justify to someone why you've picked up a bolt gun and it's only got one ability on it, or it's all of its abilities are potato, and you've got to use it for 20 missions before it becomes unpotato. No one would ever want to change weapon. You could dabble with crafting, maybe. You could dabble with crafting and give some choices on a weapon. You could dabble with exchanging components, maybe, and you could say, right, instead of this shot, you could exchange it for that shot. But I don't think there's a room for the complexity that a traditional ARPG has, because the 40k IP is just so damn limiting. Weapons are what they are. And the idea of having 10 different people with a plasma gun all doing different things just doesn't really fit the game. Doesn't really fit the IP in my mind. But I completely agree that not having this choice system as you go through the game does detract from it feeling like an ARPG. I'm really hopeful the developers, because I'm not a developer, I'm really hopeful that they've got a handle on this somehow, and they have some ideas as to what they can do to try and sort of salvage a little bit of choice. I'm not going to say that this is going to put everyone off of the game. That's not going to happen, but it will put some people off. But as well as that, I do think maybe just if you give people enough weapons, enough things to look forward to, if you make everything else good enough, maybe that will just compensate enough to hold players in until they get to a point where they're actually faced with 50 different demonic weapons to pick from, 50 different relic weapons, God knows. And guys, there are a lot of weapons not in the game yet. Maybe that will be enough to keep players interested. When they get bored, I'm going to say one last thing before I go, is I do think, and I completely agree with people that say that the weapons are all very similar. One of my biggest gripes with them is there's no damn learning curve. Because there's about 20 different abilities, when I change weapon, chances are I've already used those abilities before on another weapon. It'll take me a couple minutes to figure out the sort of rotation I want to use for that weapon and how I want to time my abilities, but the learning curve, well, let's compare it to a MOBA. Now I know they're completely different genres, but a MOBA has 4 abilities on a character, and yet every character is so completely unique. But again, we come back to the 40k IP. You can't have people doing backflips. You can't just have someone summoning a wild pig out of nowhere. The 40k IP, you're shooting guns. There's only so much you can do with shooting a gun. It's fine in any other ARPG because you can just hashtag magic. Why can a character do that? Oh, because it's magic. That's fine. 40k doesn't let you do that. 40k says this is a plasma pistol. This is what a plasma pistol's for, and that is what you're going to get. So I hope some of that made some sense, and I want to know what you guys think down below. I know people want customization. I agree with you. I want choice as a character. As I play through this game, I would love to make choices that feel like they're having a meaningful impact on my character. Because the skill system's not there to do that. Let's just make that clear now. The skill system is not there to give you choice. It's there to slowly make your character better, but only by allowing you to choose which areas you're going to excel at. It's the skill system and the weapons that are there to give you choice, but they don't. So guys, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Are you happy with it the way it is? Can you cope with it? Do you feel like if you don't get choice that you're just not digging it? Guys, I hope you found that interesting, and I hope you find it useful in coming up with some ideas of your own as to what you would like to see in the game. Remember to keep leaving the staff feedback. It's always useful for them. We've seen some great ideas popping up. Guys and girls, have a great day.